Welcome to the Greater Houston Partnership's 2020 State of the County Address. Please welcome the President and CEO of the Greater Houston Partnership, Bob Harvey.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Harvey, and I'm President and CEO of the Greater Houston Partnership. Welcome to the 2020 State of the County virtual event. We're pleased to welcome Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo for her second State of the County address, albeit under much different circumstances than her first. Harris County, like the rest of the world, continues to battle the COVID-19 virus that has wreaked havoc in our collective health and our economy. As we broadcast live today from Partnership Tower, in the heart of Harris County, I want to acknowledge that we're strictly following all local COVID guidelines. Since our office is still closed, I want to thank all of the production staff who are here making this event possible and thank them for following the safety protocols as well. Since the pandemic arrived in our region in March, Judge Hidalgo has had to make many tough decisions about the county's response to the virus, from mask orders to how to allocate federal resources. And from those earliest days, we at the Partnership have worked with the judge and other county officials, as well as with Mayor Turner and his team at the City of Houston, to provide the business community's perspective. We have also worked to establish new connections with the experts from the Texas Medical Center to ensure we're all working as one to fight the virus. We've come a long way in the last 8 months, but as evidenced by the rise in new cases in recent days, the fight is far from over. We continue to work with the team at Harris County on communication strategies and specific messaging to encourage proper, safe behaviors among residents. The pandemic has changed a great deal about how we do business. Many in our region continue to work from home as companies attempt to keep their employees safe while simultaneously striving to rebuild lost business. None of this is easy, but the Partnership remains committed to helping companies in Harris County build back even stronger. But the current economic climate also presents Houston with a number of unique opportunities. As companies operating in more expensive parts of the country work to cut costs, some are looking at possible moves to more business-friendly metros. The Houston region has long been an attractive destination for companies looking for a great talent base, world-class amenities, a prime geographic location, and a low cost of living. For our part, the Partnership represents the entire 12-county metro region, where each of the counties compete for jobs and investment. Harris County, in particular, offers a great many options for businesses of all sizes and a multitude of industries. But to attract these companies, we must remain competitive. We must be both aggressive in seeking out these opportunities and then welcoming when we get prospective companies to the table. We will continue to work closely with Harris County officials to ensure every opportunity to grow our economy through business expansion and relocation is thoroughly explored. Since Judge Hidalgo took office, Harris County has taken on new and important issues, while also working to balance its critical responsibilities in areas such as transportation and infrastructure. To be sure, we believe challenges remain in a number of these areas, such as flood mitigation, and we look forward to working with Judge Hidalgo and Commissioner's Court to continue to work on issues critical to the county's future. Harris County continues to change, and our residents rightfully expect government to tackle the big issues that affect their daily lives. While there are fundamental things that the government has always done and must continue to do, there are also new frontiers that government can take on to improve quality of life and opportunity for all of the residents of Harris County. We look forward to tackling these issues alongside Judge Hidalgo and her colleagues. Before we continue the program, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping make today's event possible.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for today's virtual event. Your generous support is essential to the success of the Greater Houston Partnership and our mission of making Houston greater. Please join us in thanking our 2020 State of the County sponsors. Our diamond sponsors: Chevron, Citgo Petroleum Corporation, Shell Oil Company. At the platinum level, AT&T, BBVA, Comcast, ExxonMobil Corporation, HEB, Jacobs. Today's gold level sponsors: Haynes & Boone, LLP, Linebarger, Goggin, Blair & Sampson, LLP, the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Our silver level sponsors: AECOM, BP America, Centerpoint Energy, Cheniere Energy, Cigna Healthcare of Texas, Civil Tech Engineering, Inc., Houston Contractors Association, HNTB Corporation, Lone Star College, Norton Rose Fulbright, Port Houston, S&B Infrastructure Limited, Traffic Engineers, Inc., Winstead PC, VIP Reception Underwriter, Accenture, Program Underwriter, UT Health School of Public Health. The Greater Houston Partnership would also like to thank the 2020 signature sponsors who provide annual support for our events, business resource groups, and councils. In addition to their generous support, the partnership would also like to acknowledge our executive partners who support the partnership and our efforts at the highest level of membership. A special thank you to the partnership's dedicated board members and 1,000 member companies for their investment in the partnership's mission. The Greater Houston Partnership would like to express our appreciation to the members of Houston's Consular Corps for their work to establish positive foreign relations between the Houston region and their respective countries. Their leadership is invaluable to building and maintaining the region's key international relationships. The Greater Houston Partnership would also like to acknowledge our elected officials, the men and women who represent Houston at the local, state, and federal level for their dedication and commitment to our region. Please join us in thanking our sponsors, members of the Consular Corps, and our elected officials. Together, we make Houston greater.
Well, thank you again to all of our sponsors. Today's program features a fireside chat with Judge Hidalgo, moderated by Scott McClelland, president of HEB Food and Drug. I'm going to introduce them both now, starting with Scott, and then turn the floor over. Scott, as I said, is the president of HEB, which operates 390 stores in Texas and Mexico. Scott oversees the operations of all HEB stores across Texas. Previously, he served as president of HEB's Houston operation. Under Scott's leadership, HEB has grown from an 11% market share to a market-leading 27% share. Known as the HEB guy, Scott is the local face for HEB, starring in TV commercials along with J.J. Watt, Jose Altuve, and other local notables. HEB strives to be a good corporate citizen, and as such, Scott serves on numerous local boards, including his role on the board of the partnership, where he served as chair in 2019. In 2017, he co-founded a nonprofit called Good Reason Houston, focused on improving education for all students across Harris County by eliminating achievement gaps. Scott earned his bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Southern California and graduated from Harvard's Advanced Management Program. And now our keynote speaker. Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo was the first woman to be elected Harris County Judge and only the second to be elected to the Commissioner's Court. With a population of more than 4.7 million residents, Harris County is the third most populous county in our nation. The judge and 4 county commissioners oversee an annual budget of $4.3 billion that helps fund key services and institutions across the more than 1,700 square mile jurisdiction. The county judge is the presiding officer on the Commissioner's Court, which oversees the county budget, sets tax rates, builds and maintains county infrastructure such as roads and bridges, and oversees other county facilities such as parks and libraries. The county judge is also the county's Director of Emergency Management, leading the Harris County Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. In addition to her formal duties, Judge Hidalgo plays an important advocacy role for the county. Judge Hidalgo believes that our region will remain competitive only through proactive and creative leadership on issues like flood control, transportation, criminal justice reform, and education. She is committed to ensuring that Harris County government is transparent, accessible, and accountable to every resident. She wants Harris County to be a place where everyone can attain the American dream. Scott, Judge Hidalgo, welcome. We will now turn the show over to you, but first, here's a brief message from the judge.
Harris County is strong because our people are strong. We're not through with COVID, but early on in the pandemic, when it was overwhelming urban centers, we in Harris County did our job so that the folks here in the largest medical center in the world could do theirs.
The judge also rolled out 2 sets of guidelines aimed at protecting construction and retail workers.
As of noon today, we elevate our public threat level. It's not enough to call essential workers our heroes. We have to create an environment in which they're safe.
As the crisis has dragged on, it's upended the lives of our county's 5 million residents. We've responded with direct and massive support for families, workers, small businesses, renters, and children.
Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo joined commissioners in announcing new details for the COVID-19 Small Business Relief Fund.
Last year, we began rethinking transportation and addressing flooding based on climate change, investing historic amounts on our environment, and reforming our criminal justice system. All of that continues, as does our focus on structural change that topples the dynasty of stale thinking and close-minded government. For the first time ever, we're investing our $5 billion budget based on metrics for success, investing in programs that actually work.
Harris County already recorded more than half the total turnout from 2016 in just the first 7 days.
We're doing all this with an eye on the future. We've stopped the construction of an unnecessary juvenile detention facility. We've reduced the number of kids who are locked up, and we're already investing in smarter solutions. We also created a $10 million Early Childhood Impact Fund, which invests in the smartest, most effective programs with the hope of growing them and dramatically improving outcomes for the youngest children in our community. There's a lot more to do, but folks, we're strong. And in 2021, we'll be even stronger.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here to engage in a fireside chat with Judge Lina Hidalgo. So, Judge Hidalgo, thank you for being with us, and thank you for your opening comments. You know, a little known fact about Judge Hidalgo, she doesn't sleep. I've talked to her late at night. I've seen her on TV late at night. You're up early in the morning. She just told me she's taken 0 days off since we got into this. And like all of us, it's been a drudge. I mean, we just carried on. And what a year. I mean, for your first full year in office, no one could have anticipated this.
That's right. And thank you so much, Scott, for doing this. To Bob and the partnership, thank you guys so much for your leadership throughout this difficult time, for bringing us together. But yes, I think it's been tough for all of us, for the community. But the big message today, for my part, is we can get through this. We've gone through a lot, and we absolutely can get through this.
Yeah, that's right. Let's not set false expectations of how far along we are. Look a week in advance. But I think the place to start, obviously, is with the story of the year, and that's the coronavirus. And it's been a major issue nationally, locally, even within smaller communities in Houston. So what's your assessment right now of how things are going, where we are, where the county is with testing and contact tracing and other programs that you've rolled out?
It's been hard, as we talked about. This year, people have had to miss weddings. They've had to miss funerals. They've had to miss graduations. let alone the over 2,000 lives that have been lost in Harris County. And these are, they're brothers and sisters and mothers and daughters and fathers and sons. These are real people who've died because of this virus. We've had now over 200,000 cases in Harris County. And so the impacts to our community are enormous. And as you say, they're nowhere near over. What we've seen in the past few weeks is a 40% increase in the number of cases. So now daily in Harris County, including the city of Houston, we've got around 500 cases. Hospitalizations are again going up. Positivity rate, which reached a low of 5.6% in September, is now up near 9% again. And we know that the initial goal just to get down to level orange is 5%. So we are headed in the wrong direction. And my concern is this is the result of half measures by the state and federal government so far, and something that has to change. I don't want to say that we're giving up or that all is lost. As long as I'm county judge, I'm not going to throw my hands up in the air and say that that's what needs to happen. But what we do need is a very comprehensive strategy like the one we tried to enforce here, a thresholds-based strategy that sets out parameters that are science-based, that don't pick and choose an indicator when that indicator happens to look better and then switch to a different one when it starts looking bad, but lays it all out from the beginning, a set of indicators. And then if you meet those indicators, you move down to a lower threat level, you reopen a little bit. If the indicators are a little better, then consistently, then you can reopen a little bit more. I believe that's the way to have a sustainable new normal, and recognizing that a widespread vaccine isn't going to be here tomorrow or in a month or in 2, it may be 6, it may be 8 months. It's about time that we have something like that that's enforceable. And look, if it doesn't come from me because I no longer have the authority, if it doesn't come from the state because of a lack of will, I hope that the federal government will help us do that for the sake of the health and the economy. I think those two go together. It's not a choice between one or the other, but it does require a consistent new normal.
I think until we get a vaccine, that even as we lower our threat level down, that we aren't through it. And so engaging in good, smart behavior like wearing a mask can help us get the level down and then keep it down, as opposed to thinking, oh, things can now go back to normal, correct?
Yeah, and that's been the issue, is that the threat levels that have been set at the state level, there really haven't been any set. It's just been reopening. Then you shut down a little bit, then you reopen again. And it's been a yo-yo, a ping pong effect that's been based on no data in particular, right? And so the way it should be is once you hit those thresholds, then you change the threat level. The threat level's not a feeling of we're tired, we wish this were over. And we do see it in other areas, in other nations, that when you are able to bring that under control, that's right. Until we have a vaccine, we're not going to be able to go back to how things were. Mm-hmm. But we are able to have a new normal because the incidence of the virus will be much lower. Of course, continuing with measures like masks. We in Harris County have a several hundred-person contact tracing team. We've continued to do testing, particularly in the areas that most need it. We're working very hard with our partners, state, federal level, as best we can to make sure that when vaccines and treatments become available, that all gets deployed. But for right now, it continues to be just the necessity of the community pulling together in a direction that is consistent and that's fact and thresholds based.
Now, the first thing that you said was you talked about the human and the economic reality of the impact that COVID-19 has had. And the county's been really involved in helping both residents and businesses weather the pandemic and help them try to, let's say, stay on their feet, in some cases get back on their feet. So you look at the COVID-19 Relief Fund, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the Harris County Small Business Recovery Fund. These are all different programs in which you've rolled out. And so how have you tended to approach that, and are there other things that you're looking at also?
It's been very tough for our small businesses, for the economy, obviously. And so what we've done is we focused on trying to come up with programs that are smart and that get the money out the door quickly.
$70 million in direct assistance to individuals, and we micro-targeted to the families most in need. We had a program that it wasn't first come, first serve, it was a lottery, because we know the folks most in need are the ones that don't have time to sit in front of the computer and be ready to hit send right when the program opens. We've done $40 million for small businesses, again with a priority in the smallest ones, $40 million for rental assistance, millions of dollars for job training, domestic violence victims, bridging the digital divide, childcare, et cetera, so many programs. But until we have the vaccine, we really get through it, it's going to continue to be tough. We are committed, though, to continue supporting all of our community all together, and I believe that the way for us to best do that is to persist with our aid, and we'll do it until those funds run out, but also to make sure that we're smart in bringing the virus under control.
Well, we've seen a number of businesses reopen. We're now seeing kids going back to school in person, but whether it's you or any elected official, I see this tightrope you have to walk between, on the one hand, the desire to get businesses back open and things going back as they were, and on the other side of the tightrope is, but if you do too much too quick, then we spike, and then everything comes closing down again. And so it's this juggling act that you have. And so how do you look at this, and how has the county played a role in trying to jumpstart the economy while at the same time balancing this need for safety?
Yeah, and look, we have, we're seeing a AAA rating still at the county. We have stock markets doing better, is doing fine, and I'm not going to be one to point to those metrics and say that things are okay. We know that the indices, several indices are still challenging. We know that there's at least 200,000 jobs that have been lost in the Houston area since January, that unemployment in Texas is at 10% compared to 3.6 or so percent this time last year. So the economy is suffering, and as everybody knows, particularly hospitality industry, the entertainment and leisure industry. What we have to recognize, though, is it's not that tension, it's not that either or. And why? Because when folks know that it's safer out there, they'll have the confidence to go out and engage in the activities that are going to boost our economy. And so as long as we have these halfway measures that people know the virus is still out there, people are still seeing 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 cases a day, numbers still very high, positivity rates still very high, news of death and hospitalizations, of course they're not going to want to be fully participating in the economy. Right now, per the state, everything pretty much is open, right? Even the bars, everybody knows that there's a loophole to where they can be open. And yet we're seeing these numbers because when you look at areas that were smarter and aggressive and brought down the virus, they're not doing economically any worse than we are, but they have saved thousands of lives and avoided thousands and thousands of hospitalizations and illnesses. And so that's where we need to sit down and recognize that, look, this is going to keep going. We got to get it under control once and for all. Already enough lives have been lost, and we're not going to have the same economy we had last year. We're not going to have that 3.6% unemployment. But certainly I believe we'd be doing better if we'd gotten this under control when we almost did back in April before things reopened, and if we brought the curve down, really contained things, opened slightly, and kept an eye, then it's easier to pick up, okay, here's a cluster, so you deal with that. And then the rest of us can have a new normal, not a return to normal, but a new normal. So I don't see it as a false choice, and I do think it's setting ourselves up for greater economic pain, for deaths and illnesses, when we now know inevitably another pullback is necessary, is going to be coming soon, I'm sure. We all see the numbers in El Paso, the tragedies there. Our hospitals were almost overwhelmed in June and July, and now our numbers are again ticking up. So we have to get this under control.
Yeah, it's one of these of just persistence and determination to continue on. And as I said early on, is not think about when it's going to be over, but look at what you can personally do in the interim to be safe, keep others safe, and as a result, then we can keep the economy going. Maybe not as fast as it was, but keep it going. Now, one of the real challenges that we've seen is, especially when kids went back to school virtually, is the issue of broadband. That many neighborhoods in Houston don't have good broadband coverage. And what we found was that kids who were forced to go back to school virtually and they didn't have it, that their results fell at alarming rates. So what has the coronavirus and then the issue associated with broadband really said to you on this topic and what we might need to do going forward?
We've heard before, right, of the kids that don't have access to the internet, that don't have access to devices, and in the past it was sort of an achievement gap, an education gap, something that we knew we had to work on. But now you think about, the child that has to learn from home, that would love to, but just doesn't have access to the devices. So we took that as a main priority in Harris County. Early on, we invested $30 million to make sure that every child in Harris County who needed a device could get one. And there was a program by the state to support local school districts in obtaining those devices with state funding. Of course, the school districts had to then put some funding of their own, and we said, look, we don't want that to be an impediment, so we're gonna, whatever gap the school districts had to cover, Harris County's gonna do it and make sure we meet the need. We learned that, number one, the need is enormous. There's around 70,000 children in Harris County who don't have the devices they need. There's an additional 90,000 kids who have the device but don't have connectivity. And then, forget the kids, there's about 200,000 households, and these are households, there's 200,000 households that don't have kids that also need connectivity or devices. And that, of course, is important for our economy. So we have that commitment and we put the money out, and it turned out part of the challenge was supply chains and part of the challenge was broadband. There are areas where we've already gotten the devices there and we've already gotten the hotspots, but they don't have a cell tower to where they can get that connectivity, or in that area, you just can't access the broadband. So we have also, we've added a commitment, another $15 million, so we're around $46 million for this digital divide issue. And part of the county's role now is to have a long-term broadband access plan. Shorter term, we're fixing it with vans, with community centers. But we know that this is a broader achievement and infrastructure issue for the future. And of course, with the legislature coming to session in January, Texas is one of the few states that doesn't have a statewide broadband plan. So that's definitely going to be something we're going to be pushing our colleagues in the legislature and the state to work on. So it's, in some ways, the urgency with which we're addressing this may be a silver lining of the pandemic, but it truly is heartbreaking to see that, for the community, with the numbers we're seeing, the numbers we've been seeing, what's safest, what's reasonable and smart is to have the distance learning. But of course, there's that gap.
Yes. One of the things we talk about frequently is that kids shouldn't be disadvantaged because of the zip code they were born into. They didn't ask to be born there. And if you can't get the basic functions like a good education, whether it's in person or virtually, that's a challenge. And it really pushes me into my next question, which on top of coronavirus, then in June with the murder of George Floyd, we now begin to have to deal in a more critical way with social injustice and racial bias within our community. And we've long thought and felt that Houston is America's most diverse city. And I think that there was a tipping point right after that where people began to say, now that's not enough to be the most diverse. It's how do we become the most inclusive and open city, and begin to look at that distinction. Of course, you've been very involved in that. The Greater Houston Partnership with their One Houston Together to address racism at its core has been critical. But how do you kind of see where we are now and what needs to be done to address this? Because it's been a source of pride, but I think as we open our eyes, we see, yeah, we could even do more.
It has been very important, necessary, and I hope impactful to see George Floyd's hometown come together in demanding change. And it's been, for me, as someone that cares and has been fighting for criminal justice reform, to see that we've got the community at our back. So we walked out of that funeral. I remember I went to pay my respects to his family, and I said to them, I'm leaving here and I'm going straight to Commissioner's Court to pass actions to continue moving the needle on justice reform. And we know they work. Last year, we implemented misdemeanor bail reform in Harris County, and so it started in earnest this year. We had, as part of the project of reform, we have a commitment to very thorough data collection and analysis so that we can make sure we're doing it right and so that other jurisdictions can learn from us. And so we have an independent monitor, Brandon Garrett from Duke, and he produced the first 6 months report on bail reform in Harris County. And he found that disparities have gone way down, that the number of people who are in jail for misdemeanor has gone way down because the judges now have other conditions of release, and so they keep folks in jail who are dangerous, not just folks who are poor. And most importantly, there is no statistically significant increase in recidivism for those released. There is nothing to show that this has led to any kind of uptick in crime or in recidivism. And so that just tells us it's good public policy. We know that this country incarcerates more people than any other country on earth. And we're not the largest country or the most populous. We're also not the safest, so that's not the way to do it. And we know who is locked up. It's people of color, particularly Black people, especially also in our juvenile facilities. And so we're seeing that works. Some of the reforms that we began instituting when we came after the funeral in that commissioner's court, additional work is a commitment to make sure that our public defender's office takes at least 50% of the cases in the next 2 years. We've seen evidence, a lot of research, independent research, news articles as well, that folks represented by a public defender have much better outcomes because the appointment of attorney system here in Harris County is inherently broken. Also, we are working on de-escalation training, on parameters for the wearing of cameras on the part of law enforcement, basically parameters, consistent parameters, so that the kind of thing that happened doesn't happen here. But look, it's about more than just the justice reform policies, and I can talk all day about what we're doing both on the adult and the juvenile system, but it's also about economic empowerment for everybody in the community. What we learned through a very lengthy study was that in Harris County, 29% of contractors, qualified contractors, are minority and women-owned businesses. But the contracts, and Bob said in his introduction, we dole out millions and billions of dollars in contracts every year for county projects. Only 8% of them go to minority and women-owned businesses. So there's a gap there. And we are now launching just yesterday, 2 days ago, a program to help support those minority and women-owned contractors so they can compete as well. And not only does that build economic empowerment for all of us, but increases competition, which means that hopefully we'll have a better outcome for taxpayers. We've built a new Office of Economic Opportunity, just hired the new director also this Tuesday, who's a fantastic person. And I'll end with this, and I think that especially the Greater Houston Partnership and the business community will appreciate that the titans of industry who aren't getting caught up in the politics and the rhetoric around maligning immigration. We know in Harris County that immigrants are an incredible part of our community, not just diversity, but their entrepreneurship, their contributions to the economy. When immigrants are facing a deportation hearing without an attorney, they're deported 95% of the time. When they have an attorney present, they're deported 5% of the time. And so that tells you they have a legal case to be here. They're just having to face a judge without knowing anything about the law. And so Harris County, for the first time also this past Tuesday, and that just tells you how much we do in one commissioner's court, we created the first ever immigrant legal defense fund with a $2.5 million annual commitment to immigration legal defense, and that's something that we've been developing with advocates, with academics for the past 2 years, and that is the right amount to meet the need and the capacity there is to provide those services for the first year. So very excited. So all of this should come together to help ultimately build that economic equity and empowerment throughout all of our community.
Yeah, I had not realized is that those percentages were what they were in terms of immigrants and deportation. That's really eye-opening. So I think one of the things, if you look at the George Floyd situation, that it created somewhat of a call to action. And in many cases, there were people who said, I feel like I need to do something, whether you were of color or if you were Anglo, but people weren't necessarily sure what to do. So what would you say to people of Houston that say, okay, there's an opportunity for us to be better than what we were. How can I participate and do that? Do you have any suggestions?
Stay on us. I mean, I was so heartened with this past election before I even knew the results. I mean, as soon as the polls closed and I knew that almost 1.7 million people voted in Harris County, I knew we as a community had succeeded because that participation is what helps government deliver. And so I say to everybody who marched after the murder of George Floyd, who showed up, at government meetings and demanded change, to stay engaged, because it's easy to pass a policy, right? But is it being implemented? It's easy to implement a policy, but is it having an impact in the disparities? Make sure that the different levels of government are sharing data. That's another thing. It's an uphill battle. We continue to fight to make sure that all these criminal justice stakeholders are producing the data that we can then make public, and not in a PDF, right, but something that folks can download and study. And so it's a big lift, but we can't stop watching and stop pushing until we see changes in the disparities and a decrease in the incarceration numbers. I mean, the numbers we have in this country and in this community, they just go beyond the pale of if any human rights. If we saw that anywhere else, it'd be untenable.
Okay, good. Let's switch gears completely. Talk about not one of our favorite subjects, but one we think about all the time, and that's hurricanes. We had two near misses this year with Laura and Delta. When you start getting into the Greek alphabet, you know it hasn't been a good hurricane year.
That's right.
And I know that you're a big supporter of the coastal barrier coming, and as are virtually everyone in Houston, but yet we haven't necessarily made a ton of progress since Harvey. And so what needs to happen both at a local and a state and a federal level for us to be able to move into more action in terms of getting this done?
Yeah, you're right. We're well into the Greek alphabet now. So
yeah. Yoda.
Yeah, it's not the best year in terms of a hurricane season. But look, first we have to call a spade a spade. In our region in particular, and I see folks are able to do this. We see the impacts of climate change, and we have to recognize as ground zero for climate change, and also as the largest petrochemical center in this hemisphere, that we got to get this together. We got to plan for the future to remain competitive and to protect our areas. And that also includes the possibility of a direct hit to our ship channel, which would be catastrophic for residents, would be catastrophic for our environment because of just the sheer amount of industry and chemicals that are there, and of course, presumably for the industry that is housed there. What we've done in the county is this past September, we commissioned our analyst's office and various departments to work with our Port of Houston and really figure out who are the stakeholders in building a coastal barrier that will protect our area from a direct hit of a hurricane. What exactly are the options, the viable options, and what will it take to advance them? And what should Harris County's role be? Because what I've diagnosed over the past 2 years is that there is this option of the Ike Dike that is moving forward, and the Army Corps is committed to it, and they've priced it out. But the problem is that's not going to be built for 10, 15, 20 years, right? And we know these hurricanes keep coming. And then there may be other options that we could build in the meantime as a supplement, not as an alternative, but as a supplement to the Ike Dike. But nobody's quite clear where they stand or what all they are. Of course, that would be built outside of Harris County, but we're not ones to say, hey, it's outside my boundaries, I'm not going to worry about it, because of course it impacts our community. So that report should be back in January, and based on that, I hope that we'll be able to have a little bit more direction. But look, whatever it is, it's going to take money, and we're going to need support from the state and particularly from the federal government on the Ike Dike, making sure that that stays on schedule and that it's funded, as it hasn't been funded yet. And then if it can be sped up, that it be sped up. But my understanding is there's a timeline. That's just how long it takes to build those kinds of projects. And then, of course, as we identify an interim supplemental solution, that we be committed to that and move in tandem. But it's going to take the county, it's going to take neighboring counties, it's going to take the state, it's going to take the feds working together, and industry, of course.
You know, it's interesting, at our annual kickoff luncheon that we had in January when Bobby Tudor took over as the chair, he talked about the importance of alternative energy. And I think over the course of 11 months, we've really seen momentum begin to swing to where folks, the realization is that we're going to need to move to this, and probably sooner rather than later, and get into action on it is going to be even more important. So while there are certainly challenges with the environment, it does seem that folks are now starting to line up to realize we need to get on this.
Yeah, and I've had great conversations with leaders in the energy industry about it, and I think we have the creativity, we have the smarts, and we have got to have the commitment, because we need to remain the leaders in energy, and we need to make sure that we're training our people to continue there. And so, yeah, it's something that I hope as time goes by, and hopefully we move on from COVID next year, that we can turn a little bit more attention to.
From kind of a 20,000 foot level, if I look at the economy of Houston, obviously energy is super important. Largest medical center in the world. We have the port, and then the fourth leg we're trying to develop is technology. But if you start to think about the port, is that the capacity for ships to come in and out, is that now that there's been an issue of, do we focus our capacity towards liquids, which would be more petrochem and oil, or cargo? The appropriate answer is we got to do both.
Exactly.
And so you mentioned dredging and widening, and everything takes money, just like you said on the coastal barrier. But how do you kind of view dredging and widening the port, both in terms of importance and how we could get there?
Yeah, so we need to widen it, we need to deepen the port. Why? Because these ships are getting larger and larger. We have to retain our competitive advantage. And as you mentioned, I mean, part of what we have going for us is our diversified economy. That's part of the reason, we're looking at the finances at the county, and we know, the vast majority of our revenue comes from property taxes. That's a lagging indicator, so we're not going to feel the impact for about a year. But also, although we expect an impact, because of our diversified economy, we expect it's not going to be as bad as it would be elsewhere. And part of that is our port. Our port is a core part of who we are. And so if we want to remain the leading port when it comes to foreign trade, we've got to make sure that we have room for those ships. We know that's going to cost about $1 billion. It's been approved by the House of Representatives in the Texas Water Development Act, and now it's headed to the Senate. And so we need that to pass, and then we're going to need the funding. Where I commend the port and Rick Campo and you guys in industry, is recognizing that if we wait for that federal funding, we're going to be in a much slower timeline. And so the commitment has been that the port and industry are going to work together to fund this and get it done for the sake of our competitiveness. We can't sleep on this. It's very, very urgent.
Yeah, well, other cities aren't waiting to see what we do.
Exactly.
They're going ahead and moving
They're
forward.
going. Yeah, they're going.
So a couple of weeks ago, you guys meaning the Commissioner's Court and Harris County, allocated and approved $10 million to go towards early education. And education, but in particular early education, has been something that the partnership has been very committed to, as has HEB where I work. So how do you see this $10 million being spent, and what are the outcomes that you're looking for?
So this year's big signature project, I wanted it to be early ed. And of course with the pandemic, we had a chance to do community engagement in person until we had to go virtual. So we've been doing a lot of virtual engagement. We found out it's barriers to access, general availability of early ed programs, and we're gonna need a much bigger investment. So this is a seed investment. This isn't where it ends by any means. And the idea is it's an incubator program. Right now, we're open for applications at harriscountykids.com from all over the country. And we're in touch with the best innovators that we met throughout this program, locally and elsewhere. And we're fielding applications for 3 or 4 programs that we're going to fund and incubate, and then hopefully bring additional investments so that ultimately the vision is for every child in Harris County to have access to early ed. We know that it's one of the most important investments a society can make. It's long overdue in this county, and it's again going to set us up for the future. So I'm very excited about this commitment. I wish we'd been able to do a lot more, but certainly with COVID, that's what we had to do. Okay, we'll do a seed funding, we'll do an incubator, and then we're going to go from here.
I think that's so terrific. I mean, at its core, when you start to think about social equity, is that if kids are starting kindergarten a year behind because they haven't had access to early childhood, if you start behind, you're going to stay behind. And I think There are short-term investments to look at. The long-term play, though, is how do you get every kid good education, starting with early education. I commend you guys for what you're doing there. Okay, we're about out of time. We got one more question coming, and that would be around county finances. We know that the county must expend CARES Act money before the end of the year. And as of mid-October, the county Budget Management Office said there was about $427 million in CARES Act allocation and $43 million in reserve. So when you look at those monies and the need to apply them, where are you looking to put it so it can have the biggest impact?
So we've gotten the bulk of that out the door, and all of that information is publicly available on the programs I shared: small businesses, domestic violence, individual assistance, rental assistance, etc. We are going to need more funds. People need government more than ever now. We're going to need a second round. And look, I know we're running out of time, so I do want to take a second to thank you for your leadership in just generally with your employees, with your business, and making sure that we're taking the precautions we need. To thank the partnership again, and Bob for bringing us together, for leading and showing that we can work together, that it's not a choice between health and economy. And I have to thank the commissioners, Commissioner Ellis fighting for economic opportunity and criminal justice, Commissioner Garcia on homelessness, child care, small business relief, Commissioner Cagle, who's worked with the nonprofits and supported small business as well, and Commissioner Raddick, who is going to be retiring after 30 years of service. So I have to acknowledge we've got a fantastic team in the county, so much left to do, but we're nowhere near done here.
I just, as we close, I just say this, is that second week of March, I called Judge Hidalgo and we began to talk about COVID-19. And her response to me was, given a choice, I'm going to stand for life. And I think your exact words were, I may not get reelected, but I am going to stand for life to make sure we lose as few people as possible. And I just think your willingness to be decisive, oftentimes when other people weren't in support of you, is to be commended, because you did stand for a place of let's have as few people in the hospital and as few people not coming out of the hospital as possible. And that hasn't always been easy. So thank you for what you've done through all of this, and thank you for the leadership of the county. I know it's not what you expected when you got elected, but it never is, right?
That's right. Thank you.
Good. Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. It's been certainly informative to hear where we are. Stay the fight, folks. Keep wearing these and do what's smart. And Bob, let me throw it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Judge Hidalgo, and thanks as well to Scott for helping lead that conversation. As Judge Hidalgo said this afternoon, there is a great deal of work that remains to be done to help Harris County recover and maintain a positive trajectory in the months and years ahead. But we can also be proud of how we've handled the significant challenges we've faced during an incredibly difficult year. Thanks again to all of our sponsors and everyone who helped make today's event possible. We appreciate all of you for joining us today. Hey, have a great afternoon.